Hello, this is episode 15 of Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast dedicated to exploring sound and image cultures in all their many forms. I'm your host, Paula Blair. This week, Shail and I discuss A Quiet Place pretty much immediately after the screening in the Tyneside Cinema cafe over a much needed cup of chamomile tea. Because we're at the cafe, there'll be a little bit of background noise, but hopefully you'll hear us okay. That's followed by a bit of an addendum from me on my own, reflecting a bit more on the film. Thank you so much to my patrons, and hello to you. Any money received through pledges on Patreon are so gratefully received and make a really big difference. Any pledges made, the money goes towards firstly sustaining the podcast and working towards improving it, because I'm working with fairly rudimentary equipment and I'm just about getting by, but I will need to start replacing and updating software and hardware. I'm starting to have guests on the podcast, so it's just nice to be able to buy them a cuppa or some lunch or something like that to thank them for taking part. For now, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this discussion on A Quiet Place.
Right then, Dr. Blair.
We are having some serious decompression time with some chamomile after A Quiet Place. My heart's still pounding.
Shall I pour, Dr. Blair?
Please.
That was the John Krasinski movie that we just saw.
Very small cast in that film, but every single person absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
I think a massive shout out to Millicent Simmons, who was playing, well, the characters aren't named in the film, but in the credits you see, I think she was called Megan, her character, and she is the deaf character, played by a deaf actress, and this was something that we were chatting about when we watched The Shape of Water, was actually disabled people playing disabled characters, so I think it's very exciting. And not only is she, I believe I heard Emily Blunt giving a really nice interview when the film was first released with Clarice Loughrey, and Blunt was saying that they really fought for Millicent, they really fought to get a deaf actress, and they really fought for her in particular, and you can see why. She's a real star in the making, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I was just admiring that moment by moment on several different levels. Plotting, compromise between tension about what you can't see and tension about what you can see. I've seen so many really tense dramas where you virtually never see the thing you're supposed to be scared of. We saw a lot of the thing we're supposed to be scared of.
Quite a bit, actually, more than I thought.
And then in addition to that, performances without speaking.
But with American Sign Language, again.
Lastly, sound design, both diegetic and non-diegetic.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, you and I have just been rather roughly treated by this film sound design.
But you notice every tiny thing and every tiny detail in the Foley sound is exaggerated much more than it would normally be, or at least there's more attention drawn to it because every sound matters, particularly when you're with Megan, the deaf child of this family, because she can't hear the noises that she's making. She seems to be totally deaf. You get subjective sound with her quite a bit. You get subjective sound with all the characters at some point. It's really fascinating when it goes to her. Everything deadens and mutes in the sound when you're aligned with her in the soundscape. The implication, I think, is that she's almost, if not totally, deaf.
That's a matter of some ambiguity because she had one of those hearing aids which shunts directly into the back of your head. And those are for people who are, you know what, I'm going to go back on that. I don't know how they work, but it was something where it was clearly related to surgery that she'd had before the invasion had occurred. She had previously had some sort of working hearing system, a bit of technology to help her hear, and a lot of the drama was, well, the new version that her dad has made for her work, or the fixed up version that her dad has made for her, will it work? One of the ambiguities was I couldn't figure at certain points, couldn't figure out whether we were getting muted hearing from her point of audition as an indication that it was working but poorly, or as an indication that it wasn't working at all. Because at some points we were hearing next to nothing from her viewpoint. I bet she was snapping her fingers next to her head. We weren't hearing anything at all. So I was thinking, why are we hearing even this kind of muted ambient sound from around her? I suppose it's one of those, we're going to use sound in an abstract way rather than a literal account of what she might be hearing at that point, because it did seem to be nothing. If we're going to dwell for a moment on the flaws this film might have had, there's very few that I could point to.
Well, we'll crazy. Even her just making sound to test it is risky. Every single thing was making me super anxious.
Before we went in, we ought to register that we were a little concerned that in watching what is, practically speaking, a nearly silent film, our fellow cinemagoers in the Roxy at the Tyneside Cinema wouldn't be quiet. And they were nearly completely quiet.
Well, there was quite a few people managed to have a really thorough catch-up during the whole film behind us.
Yeah, a couple were doing a lot of whispery talking.
It was quite funny initially when there was somebody on the other end of our row who was trying in all desperation to eat popcorn in silence, and that was a bit hilarious, frankly.
Kudos for effort there, I think.
It's just frustrating because I listened to Kermode and Mayo's film review show, and so many people have been writing it, and this has been a real source of anxiety for me because I'm dying to see this film, and I knew that the best experience was going to be on the big screen, especially if you do have surround sound, because all the tiny sounds are going to be amplified so much, and I really wanted to experience that. And I'm glutton for punishment because, of course, it's the absolute best film to see if you've got an anxiety disorder, so...
I think maybe there's an upside to this, because the levels of anxiety that you just went to, you were surrounded by a bunch of other people also being taken to high levels of anxiety, but perhaps not as high.
I think it's the reactions to it, I think, because I found like a lot of people were doing nervous laughter, so people were laughing at things that weren't funny because I think they needed some sort of release.
So the tension was palpable in that room, and also you were being taken to high levels of anxiety. You were having it in the special magic box room.
But because I internalise it, so I was crumpling into myself when the baby was happening, and when the nail happened, I was just a ball with my hand over my face.
I was doing that instinctive cover face, don't look at she's about to step on the nail, and managed to force myself to do it.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things people might find a bit cheesy is, oh look, there's now this nail sticking up out of the ground.
But it's because you know she cannot make noise and she cannot react in the natural way, and you know that this is only a precursor to the pain that she's about to go through as well in labour.
I was looking forward to a moment where it would show her nearly stepping on the nail, and everyone would go, and that would give us a kind of false relaxation for later.
I think I knew it was coming because I'd heard the interview with Emily Blunt, and I think there was a bit too much given away. She didn't actually say what was going to happen, but it was, so there's a bit with a nail set up.
I'm completely okay with spoilers in interviews like this.
When it's analysis, fine, but when it's reviews and the film is brand new out, and it's supposed to be, but I don't mind. I don't
really spoilers even in reviews and the film's brand new out.
I don't mind it either. I think it was just more, I know this is coming, so I'm going to be waiting for it, and I was.
The film was actually, as tense dramas go, and I'm not going to call it a horror film, as tense dramas go, it was relentless with its, you need to be afraid, you need to be afraid, you need to be afraid, and it did the usual thing of having a quite intense start, and then softening for a little bit and going, okay, we're just going to tell you a bit about these people's lives, and then we're going to bring the monsters back in. It did that, so I thought, okay, we've had this really intense beginning, and we're going to have some quite long periods now of not seeing the monsters, and the people being afraid for the wrong reason. People going, oh, is that a monster? Oh no, it's not a monster after all. I thought we were going to have quite a lot of that, and then the Return of the Monster stuff was going to be quite late. But actually, it's okay, you can relax for a bit. It was really brief. There was just enough time to just set up what these people's lives were like at a point which seemed to be something like a year and a half after the alien invasion. It was hardly sparse, it was quite a thorough account of how these people's lives work. It was a day in the life kind of thing. When that was done, bam, we are back into tension, threat,
relentless.
stuff out of focus. This was severe optical cinematography stuff, because in making films these days, you do not have to have parts of your visual field out of focus. Particularly when your visual objects are computer generated, you can just have them in focus. But no, a decision was made here to use relatively shallow depth of field lenses, which means that there's this job that we've just been given for the past about hour and 20 minutes, which was scan out of focus areas for things that might be bad. And these monsters are grey, they're hardly very vivid colours, they hardly stand out from their surroundings.
Brown,
So there's lots of, and that is an exhausting activity. Add on to that,
you're looking for movement actually more, aren't you? Like in the foliage and stuff.
That bit when the couple were dancing to music they were listening to on headphones, behind them was the security camera footage, like 7 or 8 security camera screens, and I wasn't looking at them, I was scanning the security camera screens going,
somebody needs to be. I think you've touched on something there in terms of genre, because it's a really intense family drama most of the time. I think it's posing the question of, what if you had a family drama where no one could speak and you have to relay emotion through sign language and through gesture and expression rather than speech. I think it's that a lot of the time, but it's sheer tension, probably for marketing reasons. It probably classes a horror, it's not horror, it's tense drama, it's built on tension.
Several of the trailers have sold it as a horror film. It's interesting to see that you can take a single film and you can make 3 trailers for it, each in a different genre. And these are neighbouring genres rather than horror, romantic comedy, gross-out comedy kind of range. The earlier trailers on that were it's a tense monster drama, and more recent ones have been it's a horror, be afraid. There may have been a change of gear in marketing when they realised that it had monster appeal, that it had horror appeal. What we must add to the scanning the background of the shots for monsters challenge that we've spent the last 80 minutes doing, the emotional intensity of the music, because it was very sparse early on, and then as the tension built, this silent landscape is being accompanied by lots of non-diegetic noise. And I use the word noise advisedly because at several points, rather than it being the recognisable tune, it's just a single tone that's being held constantly and sometimes being varied. And I think that just about qualifies as music, but it's right on the periphery. I'm reminded of the sound design for Dunkirk, which was noises held for a while. Yeah. And it's not like you go, oh, is that noise coming from the story space? That's definitely non-diegetic sounds.
It's a mood.
But it's on the borders of what we'd call music. That's not to say that there's anything bad about it, no, of course not. It's actually much more effective than music, because music is associated with certain conventions which are non-realist, in film at least. And so add those 2 levels together, and understandably we need some chamomile. This film also let some of its main characters die quite spectacularly, and in both instances it was one of those, I found myself really feeling the loss of these characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a monstery drama, this film had managed to characterise its characters very well.
Really well.
Monstery drama where people only speak in text on screen, which is subtitling their American Sign Language. The fact that there was conflict, of course, works as well. That helps to characterise people.
The character of Megan, I think, is, she's in early teens. There's no real barriers because the family has actually had to normalise to her way of speaking for their survival. So that's not an issue, but the issue is still lack of communication, and that father's not fully communicating to his daughter. I don't blame you for the death of our other child, and I love you very much. And so you get a poignant death scene centering on that, and it's, the tears are tripping you because it has built up over most of the film until that point.
It was great fundamental drama as in families wanting different things for each other, initially having disunity and then achieving the unity through the conflict with the monsters. There was also some larger scale drama because there was just a couple of moments where you got to see what kind of larger society they were living in, because initially it was, there are some other people out there who are surviving as well as them. They seem to know the rules now, and they light beacons every night. And I thought that's quite good. It gives you a sense of a larger situation, and then the fact that those beacons are not happening later on in the film, and it's something like...
Or at least our attention isn't drawn to them. So I don't know if they weren't happening or if we just weren't getting to see them the way we were shown them early on.
Well, I think there was that one bit where the 2 kids were on top of the corn silo.
But they couldn't keep it.
And they weren't getting any response, but I suppose, they couldn't keep the fire lit for very long either. So moments of ambiguity, for sure. And then the thing where the father and the son happened upon the guy who was burying his wife in the woods, and that moment where he decided to commit suicide by monster, which is, if you want to kill yourself in this environment, it's very easy because it just makes sense. You get killed.
But also it wasn't clear why he decided to do it the very second that other people were there.
To be frank, I suppose every single one of these people is under a fantastic amount of pressure, and so the fact that they're really nervously afraid might explain some stuff. But if I was that elderly guy who just lost his wife, I think I'd still just about have the sense to go, you guys leave.
Is that this child?
I'm gonna do suicide by monster now, but I'll let you guys leave.
But it was that build up because they cast this guy spectacularly. The way he built up his face before that primal scream came out, and the term primal scream kept coming into my mind actually, because I was thinking about the baby being born, and that first gasp of air is that primal scream is all you've got. The yell of the father when he's like, I've had it, I need to save my kids, I'm doing this. Also the bit with the waterfall where it's safe for them to make noise, and it's safe for the men specifically, the father and the son, to express themselves by yelling into the waterfall because they can't be heard. There's a really nice shot for the audience's point of view from the other side of it, and you can't hear them.
You can see that they're howling.
You see that they're really screaming, but you can't hear them because the waterfall's so loud, so they're safe.
So the central shared motive for viewer and character in this film is everyone wants to be able to make a noise.
Yeah.
And we want the characters to be able to make a noise. We're together on this, I think. It's not just the implied viewer, but the average viewer as well, because we're so quiet, being so quiet, going, we're with you. And so at the end, when there's the climactic, okay, we've figured out a way to kill these things now, and what's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to make a noise, and it's the pumping of a pump-action shotgun. That does imply that the screaming's going to come later, the getting back to communicating auditorily is going to come back later, but for a moment we're going to need to make technological sounds, and so the two things they have is it's actually three pieces of technology. They've got the hearing aid, the PA system that they're using to broadcast the very high-pitched sound that they can make with it, and the pump-action shotgun. So it's, for a moment we're going to use these three methods, and once we've cleansed the planet of these things, then everyone will be able to make the noises they want to make again.
It's all, in a way, technologies of war, because it's listening technologies, it's viewing technologies, and it's killing technologies.
Yeah. The whole big thing was setting up the humans to be initially stipulated as the ones who, in spite of all the technology, are losing in this. And then there was that virtually predictable moment of, no, actually I think you find our technology is the thing that makes us superior after all. We just needed to do a bit of research and development on it.
Just needed to let the girls in on the action.
Well,
this is a fundamental mistake all movie men make, is that they keep the girls out of the basement, and the girls need to be in the basement helping with the experiments in the first bloody place, because then you won't get to about a year and a half in to this nonsense.
That's the implicit message. The early situation is one in which the boys are going out and doing stuff and the girls are staying in. I thought, oh no, is the film really going to be advocating all of this domesticity as proper
showing
for women?
It as a mistake, as folly.
So what it does is it stipulates it as a mistake. So
and it's the idiot boy it's the sister who gives him the present, and she's not that naive, but she believes that the kid has learnt his lesson and that he shouldn't make sound with this thing. Leave it with the batteries out, even though you're going to drop it every 5 minutes anyway. So she thinks she's doing a kindness to this 4-year-old boy, but actually manages to get himself killed because he doesn't get it. I think it's worth pointing out the pregnancy, because it starts off 89 days in, and you don't know what's happening, you just work it out, it's just implied what's happened. So the first time you meet the family, it's 89 days after the initial event, we suppose.
Yeah.
After that initial scene, that initial opening sequence, it's 472 days later it starts at, and you see Emily Blunt's character is heavily pregnant. So I knew about the pregnancy because I saw a tweet the other week by Nish Kumar, the comedian, going, well, it's pretty impressive that these people were still banging during all this, that they still managed to have sex very quietly. To take precautions in all of this tension, and I was thinking, but maybe she's already pregnant and there's nothing they can do about it. But it's very clear from the amount of days that were given that she couldn't possibly have been pregnant in the earlier sequence, because this is well over a year later.
This is post-apocalyptic shagging we're talking
about.
I do wonder why there wasn't any dialogue with anyone going, Blimey, did we make a really big mistake in getting pregnant? Because there's all this logistics we now need to consider to do with what happens when the baby cries, because babies cry.
Well, I think they try to address that by setting up the soundproof room. I have to say, as someone who has a real anxiety around noise, they could have done a hell of a lot more soundproofing, frankly. They've got bare wooden floors with nothing on them. There's a lot more that you can do to pad things and make things muted and silent. So they try to address it, I think, and then they set up the crib that's soundproofed and got an oxygen tank.
That bit when they're in the soundproof room and the father lights, he's got a cigarette lighter with him and he uses that just to produce the light, and then he turns on the oxygen tank
with the lighter on.
Yeah, with the lighter on, and puts it over the baby's face very close to the lighter. I did think, hang on, doesn't someone here know enough to know that this shouldn't be done? Isn't Emily Blunt's character a nurse, it's implied, or even a doctor?
Either that or she's become very knowledgeable about all this stuff. We don't know what it is with their eldest son, but he seems to have a medical condition. At least early on he's ill, and that's why they're in a drugstore and she's looking for medication for him and she medicates him, but the shot was too quick. It's one of those where the foreground's out of focus because it's the close-up on the containers. It only goes into focus very briefly, and you can see names, so they're prescription for specific people.
My assumption was it's antibiotics. It's likely there'll be antibiotics in this prescription.
Yeah, I think I was trying to look at the names actually. I probably should have been looking at what the medication was, not that I know what medications are for and what their names mean. I think I was looking for names in case she was looking at names to see if there's anything there for him, because you don't get any of their names during it. But it was really nice touch that they're named in the credits.
Yeah, that introductory scene was a great warm-up for just how many focus racks there were going to be in this film, and I should have been counting them. There was so many. You're looking at this, are you? Oh no, you're looking at this instances. And they're anamorphic lens focus racks as well, and when you do it with an anamorphic lens it creates quite a noticeable distortion. That was quite conspicuous. It kept the entire thing slightly lacking in total realism, and that may have been a good thing, because to have been even more immersed into that, even less aware of the cinematic process, might have been enough to just finish us both off. Oh, there's one other thing that was really notable. Surround sound. There was so many instances when the sound was everywhere, and then suddenly it was rear left, and then suddenly it was front right, and so the directionality of the sound was being quite exquisitely controlled as well.
I think you do come out of the screen going, where is it?
We would be very good in surviving in any apocalyptic situation which was exactly like it is in a certain film. So you and me and zombies, we'd be fine.
I don't think so. I'm not fit enough for zombies. I would be terrible in a quiet place because I am too clumsy. I drop everything. No matter how much I try to be quiet, I make horrendous amounts of noise because I bump into everything, I drop everything. It's not happening. I would be the first to die.
Well, I just pad you.
Just wrap me in many duvets.
Sometimes when there's really fraught protests and a bunch of protesters turn up cocooned in pads because they suspect that there's going to be police brutality, that's what we should do. We should just cocoon you in padding, like those kind of boxing helmets, full kendo lot, and then there's lots of gaffer tape as well to keep it all on you, and so that you look like the Michelin Man.
I would still manage to knock all the stuff over everywhere. They had so much stuff that was just sitting around waiting to be knocked over and make clattery big noises. Nightmare.
There was a couple of details in there where I was going, hang on, how does that work? One of the things was she was listening to something on headphones, so presumably she had some sort of personal music player. How did that work?
Where was it?
Yeah, so
and
if it was an iPod...
what is she connected to?
Yeah, how are they charging an iPod at that point? And if it was like an old-fashioned walk person or Walkman...
Those things are noisy.
Batteries, maybe. I suppose they probably have access to thousands of batteries because they're looting. So maybe. Another thing that really annoyed me was when she was doing her blood pressure leading up to the birth of the baby, she was writing it on this calendar, and then next to due date it said that the next day was going to be a full moon. So what that implied was that they were using a calendar for that year, and I think it was either 2020 or 2021. And it really annoyed me that if there'd been this apocalypse in something like 2019, would anyone have actually had access to a 2021 calendar? Because they come out in the year leading up to that year, don't they? Often it's like October, November they come out.
Yeah, that's right.
So that annoyed me that bit.
On the little grave marker for where the little boy died, it was 2016 to 2020, and it's over a year after that most of the film takes place. So you're right, it's the next year.
So it was in 2021 or even 2022. So how did they have access to that when the apocalypse had happened and just kind of stopped industry in something like 2019? But these are tiny elements where we might go, hang on, causality is a bit funny there. Overall, tight, finely oiled machine that I think is going to spawn a sequel, because having seen 10 Cloverfield Lane, we're aware that you can take a very tense piece of alien invasion film like that, and as long as it's got a clear idea of its fictional story space and an implication that there's going to be some sort of apocalypse, you can pump out a sequel very nicely, even if it's in what might call a different genres.
That was interesting, that film, because it wasn't a direct sequel as such. It was connected, like they were blood relatives, I think was the term that was used.
It was, here's more stuff happening in the same story space.
Yeah, it was that universe, it was that world, but it was a totally different story, and there's definitely scope for something like that to happen in this as well.
Particularly as the last shot is, right, we've got some work to do now, and Emily Blunt pumps her pump-action shotgun and looks like she's hungry for a bit of work, and basically that's your sequel.
Yeah, it's that you killed my husband, you're gonna get it sort of look. Yeah, I'm saving my babies.
Another work that it reminded me of is there are two short stories from something like, the first is from about 1908 and the second is from about 1919, and they're about events when something happens and everyone in London becomes effectively blind. The earlier one is there's a really thick fog and you can't see your own hand in front of your face, so everyone in London effectively becomes blind. And the later one is there's a virus and everyone gets it and it makes you blind for 10 days, and at the end of it you're fine and you can see again. But of course, how do you survive for that time? In both instances, the way that people survive is by calling on the blind. People who've been blind since birth, people who know London like the back of their hand, they can help keep society running. And interestingly, in the earlier of the two stories, the government doesn't notice early enough to call on the blind, so it's only kind of individuals occasionally going, right, society's falling around us, but we've got a blind person with us, they can help us. With the latter of the two stories, the government does realise in time and they organise everything so that the blind are ready to do things like act as effectively cab drivers to get people around London. They're not driving cabs, they're walking, they're leading people around London. So the reminder there was, this is a story about when there's this inability to use a certain sense, and people who haven't used that sense ever are the best people to exist in that environment. And so having the daughter be the one who learns how to use sound to cause pain.
It's her deafness and the work that her father does on the hearing aids, trying to develop new ones for her, that accidentally gives them a way of hurting these creatures, immobilising them.
So today's lesson is, in a situation in which sound is a weapon being used against us, call on the deaf.
Also, just listen to the people who have no voice. Seek out the people who have no voice.
Also, the more abstract message, the less sci-fi geek method.
That's how I take it as well. It's, listen to people. And I've had some further thoughts on A Quiet Place, if you're happy to indulge me. I was wondering, were there any comparable examples of creature features, these kinds of monster movies that are quite oppressive? I was also thinking a bit further about genre, in that there's probably a subgenre there to be had with a hyphenated tension horror drama, something like that. So I was thinking, were there any comparable examples? And Jaws is probably the clearest, or certainly the first example that springs to mind. There's that oppressive, non-human presence representing something probably quite repulsive about human emotion or behaviour. And in A Quiet Place, it's the silencing of a whole population and the picking off of the population as well, a total shutdown of society really, and the killing of non-conformists. So anybody who can't or refuses to be silent are disposed of. I was also thinking about a film called Darkness Falls, which was quite a mild horror from 2003. I don't think it really made much noise in itself, to sort of make a pun. I am only aware of it because a few years ago I examined for the Moving Image Arts level in Northern Ireland, and a clip from that film was something that the students were required to do a sequence analysis of. It's a very mild, not very good, I guess, young adult horror. It's about the spirit of a person who had been lynched 150 years earlier, and this spirit comes back. It takes the form of the Tooth Fairy, because I think it specifically targets children, and it only attacks at night and you have to stay in the light. And this is an idea that had been done a few years before in an X-Files episode of the same name, only there it wasn't spirits, it was a sort of woodland swarm of kind of locust-like creatures who would feed on the flesh, but only if you were in the dark. They would wrap you up in a cocoon kind of thing and consume the body that way. So in that premise, you have to stay in the light to survive. In A Quiet Place, you need to stay in the silence to survive. And the creatures can't see you. They are detecting you more with radar sound. The creatures seem to be giant ears, they seem to be huge sonic receptors. And I was also wondering, you could probably read them as being being representative of a disorder called misophonia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it. I've never heard it said before. I've read a lot about it because I suspect that I have this. It's also called, annoyingly for us, Selective Sound Sensitivity Syndrome, SSSS, which can be a difficult sound. And it's a neurological disorder that's a deep, intense hatred of sound. And people have different triggers for this. Mine, for example, would be very heavy breathing. I can't stand the sound of that. It's a prevalent point because, particularly in the cinema, it's incredibly aggravating. It's a space in which, to become fully immersed in the film that you're watching, you need silence, you need everybody else to be considerate and to stop talking and stop using their phones and to not be moving around so much that they're knocking everything over and making lots of distracting noise. So I think this film is the perfect case study. I was sort of, in a way, playfully thinking about the idea of the film as a fantasy for those of us who are sickened by the sounds of others, who get these intense spikes of anxiety because of the noise that other people make. So that could be something to probe into a little bit further, because in a way there were so many, when I refer to the code, I'm referring to the Wittertainment Code of Conduct in the cinema, and it's the 10 points that you're not supposed to do. It includes things like no eating of anything harder than a soft roll, no slurping of drinks, no talking, no mobiles, no hobbies, really referring to things that are quite loud and require talking and moving and that sort of thing. And I'm saying this in a jokey way. In a way, you're kind of fantasizing that those creatures would come in and pick off the people who were talking during the film and being really distracting. There was a lot of people, couples passing, very noisy, packets of popcorn back and forth, or talking. And I mean, it's different having a response to the film. I'm quite a quiet person, and I think because of the film, I was adhering to its rules. I went into complete silence. I crumpled into myself and was holding my mouth closed every time something incredibly tense was happening. Whereas Andrew initially couldn't help himself react verbally to a couple of things. And normally that's fine. It's just, I think in that film, as I say, I was adhering to the rules of the film itself, whereas I can't make noise during this, we'll all die. So I really bought into it, and that was part of the immersive experience of it for me. But unfortunately it wasn't that immersive. I couldn't really get fully into it because you're so aware of all these other people, and there is a palpable, there is a very clear sense of tension in the room, and it's a collective experience, but there are so many people who are not participating in that. It really breaks the spell, which is unfortunate. So I kind of wanted the creatures to come in and pick off those people in a way, obviously not really, but when you're in that moment and you're just desperate for somebody to be quiet when they're just being really inconsiderate and having a chat with someone during not just a film but a film like that, it's really aggravating. And it's been interesting listening to Kermode and Mayo's Some Review Show. It's been interesting listening to the reviews. Wittertainees write in and they talk about their film experiences, and they noted that there's been a real spike actually in the emails they've been getting about code violations. It's amplified more in this film because it's so quiet. It's been fascinating hearing emails where in some instances the film is commanding silence from its audience, but it's unfortunate that it's not all audiences. There are lots of audiences out there that are really just not playing ball with this one. And I was wondering, what really does it take for other viewers to start considering others more? I went into this a little bit a few weeks ago when I was reflecting on our discussion after visiting the museum that time, where there's just such a huge lack of consideration for other users of a public space, and cinema is a public space, and it's also in a way a private one at the same time, because you're supposed to be able to be immersed in your own connection with the film, and when other people are making that impossible, I mean, I have to say I was probably a bit more relaxed because it turned out that we had free tickets on our Tyneside membership cards, which we didn't know about, so we actually got to see the film for free. Well, as free as you can have it when you've paid for a membership, of course. And plus I'd had a couple of glasses of wine as well with dinner beforehand, so I was a bit relaxed going in. So I mean, there were times when I was turning around to the people behind us, and probably if they'd been a bit closer I would have said something, and I didn't. I think because of the film as well, I felt compelled to go shh, but I didn't. I think think because of the film that we were watching, there's plenty of other films where I have gone and spoken to people because it's just been unacceptable and you haven't been able to ignore it. And it's the sort of film where no matter how quiet you try to be, you're amplified by the silence. And I think that's in a way a nice segue into thinking about silence as an amplifier. I was reminded of a scene in Marnie where Tippi Hedren's character is a thief and she's robbed something from the safe and she's trying to leave her office building, and there's a cleaner there who you don't know yet, but it turns out that the cleaner's deaf when Marnie drops her shoe, you know, and it's a really incredibly tense scene and it's completely silent until that drop happens. Really highly tense. It's interesting watching that one because you're aligned emotionally with a morally reprehensible character, so you believe her to be at this point until, you know, Sean Connery rapes and fixes her, of course. But it's through that use of silence that you become aligned with her because it's so deeply tense. And of course, Hitchcock was a silent film director, and when he was directing films in the silent era, he was using sound a lot already, and it was sound that you could see happening, like doors slamming and that sort of thing. The original silent version of his first sound film, Blackmail, for example, the famous knife scene, the original of that, it's actually the door slamming that makes Alice jump. And on the subject of doors, I'm doing some really nice segues here, I hope you'll agree. It was kind of driving me a bit mad that there were no doors in the houses or anything, and the creatures just had free rein to wander in and out of places. But then I was thinking, of course there's no doors because doors are loud. If they slam even accidentally, even just the closing mechanism, that sort of thing, it would draw attention. So they have to live in a world that's also without doors, which is quite terrifying, and there's a real lack of privacy. The creatures just, they're able to permeate space because there's no closable barriers. It's really just the things like the mattress and stuff, which is stuff that they can move easily. It's unfortunate because you imagine, well, the shape that these creatures seem to be, they seem to have these massive nutcracker style claws. I suppose not really, like they seem to have these massive claw-like arms that fall back on themselves, and they don't seem to have finger-like appendages. You imagine that they wouldn't really be able to open doors very well, but they can't risk having the doors slamming and drawing attention, so it's a really difficult thing there. Very often sound is not just an amplifier, but it is, I mean, with all film, but I think it's more obvious here because it is so silent that sound extends screen space. It extends the geography of what you're aware of. It starts to map out the geography of space and where anybody might be at any time. It extends what we would call the mise en scène, which is everything you see on screen, because you can hear what you can't see. That is, if you are able to hear, you can hear what you can't see. And there is a really terrifying moment when Millicent Simmons' character is looking for her brother, and it's day 473, and it's the night that the mother's gone into labour and they've all got separated. She's looking for her brother out in the fields. The creature is behind her and it's scanning around for being able to hear anything because she's making the tiniest rustling noises, so it perceives something's nearby but it can't see her. And so it's the creature that can't see but can hear everything, and she's the being that can see everything in her field of vision, but she has no hearing and she can't hear that it's behind her. She's starting to crackle the hearing aid that her father has devised for her, and it's then by accident that she starts to figure out that it's to do with the frequency, that if you can get high enough it will actually hurt these creatures. So it's a kind of eureka moment that's a payoff to the incredible tension, but of course she's still trying to find her brother and you don't know what's happened. There are all these, so to say, this tension horror aspect, because there are horrific moments in the film but they're actually happening relatively seldom. It's pure tension so much of the time. I suppose just finally, and I'm probably being a little bit flippant here, I'm sure I'm not the only person. I have been trying to avoid seeing too much on the likes of Twitter about this because I was dying really to see the film, and I don't mind spoilers or anything really, but I don't want the experience ruined by knowing everything that happens and over analysing it before seeing it. But I was wondering, is the film, or certainly you can read the film as an advocate for contraception, because it's the children who cause the breaches in safety just about every time, I think. Firstly, at the drugstore, they're only there because one of the children is ill, and that's where the 4-year-old gets the noisy rocket, and that scene foreshadows so much of what else is going to happen. And the first encounter the child has with the rocket is knocking it off the shelf, and his sister sees that it's going to happen and manages to catch it before it crashes to the floor and kills them all. And he's this 4-year-old child, and he's living in this, he's not a silent person, but he's being forced to live in a silent world. And especially as children, it's not natural to be silent because you should be making all kinds of noise, and especially if you haven't necessarily got that much of a vocabulary, that much language yet, you're exploring your capacity to make noise quite a lot. So it's such an oppressive existence, and the child doesn't understand the implications of everything, even though it's explained to an extent. Well, he's just told no, we have to be quiet, it's too loud, but he takes the batteries anyway when his sister gives him back the toy without the batteries. And of course it's only much later on in the film, so well after a year later, when she has the toy, for some reason they seem to have it, she seems to have kept it, or it was maybe left at the site, and it only occurs to them then. Her father that day at the drugstore had got some pliers for her, and it's only so much time later that she thinks to snip the cable so that this rocket can't make any more noise. So anyway, there's that. There's the deaf child who can't hear her own noise, and also there's the baby. There's an advocacy here for contraception, or at least thinking very carefully about what situations are good to have children, and is that even realistic? Probably a bit of a jumble of thoughts there, well, probably as always, but hopefully there's something there that we can return to, because these were recorded fairly raw after seeing the film. Thanks again for listening, we're really pleased to have you on board, and again for all the support, it's so very much appreciated. And I have been getting some really nice feedback from a few people that they have been finding the stuff I've been making really useful, whether it's the YouTube videos or it's these podcasts. I'm so delighted, it makes it really worthwhile. Please do keep any feedback coming, and I do really want to hear from people and start having more guests. I'm going to try and get more people on to get more voices happening, so that it isn't just Andrew and I having a chat about a film we've just seen every week. Thanks for listening, take care of yourselves, catch you next time.